Count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings and see what God has done. Welcome to Thanksgiving Eve, the day before Thanksgiving, at least in America. The fourth Thursday of every year is the day we give thanks and remember all the things we're thankful for. Mostly this was a day when the Native Americans and the Pilgrims decided to play nice for a day, which is why in America we pretend to play nice with our family. I won't be visiting my family, but Joe's family. I like Joe's family. Anyway, we're going to do our shout out for one individual. Massive shout out is on Monday, and the second part is on Tuesday. No, I'm sorry, it's on Friday. I know what I'm talking about. Oh, my eyes are watering. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Ready? Racy time. Maybe. There we go. Alright, so we got She Stole, we got Goat, we got Ian, Muncie, Rye, Jamaican, Kifla, Rook, Leech, Crystal, Kifla, Alice, A&M, Nacha Daily, Distracted, Leech, let's see, Cruising Nuts, Alice, We Go, Lainey, Josie, Carozo, Jacob, ANG, Susan Rambles, there's She Tripping, there's Carol, let's see, there's Hillbillies, there's Sylvia, there's Ron, there's Bluegrass, there's Catching, there's Spectral, Amboys, oh, we're getting close to the end, there's Brits, there's Judy May, there's Glitter, it's going to be Goat. Okay, so Adventures with Goat is a loaded channel. Hang on a minute. There we go. About adventuring and preserving history, sort of like us, metal detecting abandoned mining towns, ghost towns, railroads, kayak fishing, underwater metal detecting, mountain biking. So he does a little bit of everything. Here's a ghost hunting one. Here's some exploring ones. Here's some shorts. Looks like he made some candy. That's always fun. And not very many lies, but there's a mail call. And map room. Ooh, map room is fun. So if you like any of that, give him a like, or give him a check, look at him, check him out. That's what I was trying to say. And trigger warning, before I forget, this video is a little dark. There is some descriptions that are not food friendly. If you're squeamish, you can skip those parts. But the topic, you kind of have to give some description in order for people who don't know an idea.
Dun, 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 dun.
All right, Mr. Man.
It's time for the Bearded Historian's Weekly Fun. Now, November 28th, 1994. This is the date of a fellow who was put to death. Interestingly enough, the prison did the job. He is a guy that quite a few of you probably have heard of. He was a real, pardon the phrase, sick puppy. Known as the Milwaukee Monster. He's a serial killer and sex offender who went through the process of killing and dismembering 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts. Typically, all are part of the skeleton. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, Dahmer was born in 1960, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He would take and commit most of his activities in Ohio or Wisconsin. Diagnosed as borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and psychotic disorder, but he was found legally sane in his trial. He would get life in prison on February 17th, 1992. Interestingly enough, they gave him 941 years imprisonment.
I still don't understand the point
That
of that.
is... okay, you get reborn, you're going back in for... You're getting reborn, you're going back in. That is a lot of times to slam on one person, yeah.
That seems redundant.
It's very, very redundant. And he would wind up being imprisoned at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Would wind up getting, like we said, he would get beaten to death by a Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at Portage. But starting with the backstory, which is always kind of fun with some of these guys, this guy here, interestingly enough, he was doted on as an infant and toddler by both parents. His mother was known to be tense, greedy for attention and pity, and argumentative with her husband and their neighbors. When he entered first grade, Lionel, his dad, had studies, which kept him home for most of the time. When he was home, his wife, who was a hypochondriac, suffered from depression and was demanding constant attention, spending an increasing amount of time in bed. On one occasion, she attempted suicide using Inquinol. Now, neither parent devoted much time to their son, as they later recollected that from an early age he felt unsure of the solidity of the family, recalling extreme tension and numerous arguments between his parents during his early years. Dahmer had been an energetic and happy child, but became notably subdued after undergoing a double hernia surgery shortly before his 4th birthday.
Fun.
Yeah. At elementary school, Dahmer was regarded as quiet and timid, and one teacher recollected she detected early signs of abandonment due to the father's absence and mother's illnesses, the symptoms of which increased when she became pregnant with the second child. In elementary school, Dahmer had a small number of friends. Well, in October of '66, the family moved to Doylestown, Ohio. Joyce gave birth in December. Dahmer was allowed to name the child of the new baby brother. He chose the name David. The same year, Lionel earned his degree and started work as an analytical chemist in nearby Akron. Well, this is where the story kind of paints itself. It says, at an early age, Dahmer manifested an interest in dead animals. His fascination with dead animals might have begun when, at the age of 4, he saw his father removing animal bones from beneath the family home. According to Lionel, Dahmer was oddly thrilled by the sounds the bones made, and became preoccupied with animal bones, which he initially called his fiddlesticks. He occasionally searched beneath and around the family home for additional bones and explored the bodies of live animals to discover where their bones were located. Well, in '68, the family moved again, this time to Bath Township in Ohio. This address was their 3rd in 2 years and the Dahmer's 6th address since marriage. The home stood on a 1.5 acre of woodland with a small hut a short walk from the house, where Dahmer began collecting large insects and the skeletons of small animals such as chipmunks and squirrels. Some of these remains were preserved in jars of formaldehyde and stored within a hut. Well, 2 years later, during a chicken dinner, Dahmer asked Lionel what would happen if the chicken bones were placed in bleach. Lionel, pleased by what he believed was his son's scientific curiosity, demonstrated how to safely bleach and preserve animal bones. Well,
And see,
that's perfectly normal science. Yeah.
that's a fairly normal thing, and I can see that leading to taxidermy. Fairly normal, scientifically, maybe a little off the grid type stuff, but not dangerous.
Yeah. And so Dahmer started incorporating these preserving techniques into his bone collecting. He began collecting dead animals, including roadkill, which he would dissect and bury beside the hut, with the skulls occasionally placed atop makeshift crosses. Well, according to one friend, Dahmer explained that he was curious how animals fit together. In one instance in 1975, Dahmer decapitated the carcass of a dog before nailing the body to a tree and impaling the skull on a stick in the woodland behind the house.
See, now we just went from normal to I'm curious, I can be a vet, to I'm insane.
I'm creepy, yeah. As a prank, he later invited a friend to view the display, claiming he had discovered the remains by chance. The same year, Lionel taught his son how to preserve the animal bones. Joyce began increasing her daily consumption of Inaquil, laxatives, and sleeping pills, further increasing her emotional distance from her husband and children. Well, during his freshman year at Revere High School, Dahmer was seen as an outcast. By 14, he began drinking beer and hard alcohol in daylight hours, frequently concealing his liquor inside his jacket he wore to school. When a classmate asked why he was drinking scotch in a morning history class, Dahmer shrugged and said that alcohol was his medicine. Although largely uncommunicative, in his freshman year, Dahmer was seen as polite and highly intelligent, but earned only average grades. He was a competitive tennis player and briefly played in the high school band. Now, when he reached puberty, he discovered he was gay, did not tell his parents. In his early teens, he had a brief relationship with another teenage boy, although he never had intercourse. And by Dahmer's admission, he began fantasizing about dominating and controlling a completely submissive male partner. In his early to mid-teens, and his fantasies gradually evolved into focusing on chests and torsos, these fantasies gradually became intertwined with dissection. Until about 16, he also conceived a fantasy of rendering unconscious a particular male jogger he found attractive, and then having other thoughts with the body. On one occasion, Dahmer concealed himself in the bushes with a baseball bat to lie in wait for this man. However, the jogger did not pass by on this particular day, and Dahmer admitted that this was his first attempt to attack and render an individual submissive to him. Well, Dahmer was also known to his high school peers as the class clown who often staged pranks, which became known as doing a Dahmer. These included bleeding and simulating epileptic seizures, cerebral palsy at school and local stores. Occasionally, he would perform these antics for money to purchase alcohol.
I mean, again, pranks and, high
school
alcohol,
activities.
Those are fairly normal wild child activities.
Right. In 77, Dahmer's grades had declined. The parents got a private tutor with limited success. The same year, in an attempt to save their marriage, the parents attended counseling sessions. They continued to quarrel frequently, and when Lionel discovered Joyce had engaged in a brief affair, they decided to divorce, feeling their sons wished to do so amicably. The process of their divorce soon became increasingly bitter, and Lionel wound up moving out of the house in early 78 and temporarily residing in a motel in North Cleveland, Massillon Road. In 78, Dahmer would also graduate from high school. A few years before his graduation, one of the teachers observed Dahmer sitting close to the school parking lot drinking several cans of beer. Quite a homework hobby there. When the teacher threatened to report the matter, Dahmer informed him he was experiencing a lot of problems at home, and the school's guidance counselor was aware of them. That spring, Joyce, contrary to court order and without informing Lionel, moved out of the family home with David to live with relatives in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. Dahmer had just turned 18 and remained in the family home. Now, Dahmer's parents' divorce was finalized on July 24, 1978, and Joyce was awarded custody of their younger son and alimony payments. Now, so we now have him out of high school, and Dahmer would commit his first murder in 78, 3 weeks after graduation. He picked up
He's a big boy now.
Oh, yeah. Now I can do the big things. That first murder would be a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was 18 years old, and Dahmer would lure him to his house with the pretext of drinking. Hey, we're going to pick up a teen, let's promise drinking. The promise of a few beers, they had the house to themselves. According to Dahmer, the sight of a bare-chested Hicks standing on the roadside stirred sexual feelings. Though when Hicks began talking about girls, he knew any sexual passes would be rebuffed. After several hours of talking and drinking and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave and didn't want him to leave. Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell.
You will stay with me.
Yeah, he later stated that Hicks struck him from behind, with the dumbbell as Hicks sat on a chair. While Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer would strangle him to death with the bar of the dumbbell, strip the clothes from his body before exploring his chest with his hands, and then jacking off while he stood above the corpse.
Well, yeah, that's fun.
Now, this is where it gets kind of crazy. If this does get a little graphic, just fast forward. I apologize. Dahmer would drag the body off to the basement. The following day, Dahmer would dissect the body in the basement. He buried the remains in a shallow grave in the backyard. Several weeks later, he unearthed the remains and pared the flesh from the bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid by flushing the solution down the toilet. He would crush the bones with a sledgehammer and scatter them in the woodland behind the family home. He threw Hicks's necklace and knife he used to dismember him from the West Bath Road Bridge into the Cuyahoga River. Now, 6 weeks later, after he killed Hicks, Dahmer's father and his fiancée returned to his home where they discovered Dahmer living alone. That August, Dahmer enrolled in Ohio State University, hoping to major in business. Well, Dahmer's sole term at OSU was completely unproductive, largely because of his drinking habits. He received failing grades in the Introduction to Anthropology, Classic Civilizations, and Administrative Science. The only course Dahmer actually was successful at was riflery, where he got a B- grade. His overall GPA was 0.45.
I did not have good grades when I was in high school. In fact, I failed the senior year the first time, or almost failed the senior year the first time. But I don't think my grade point average was that low.
That's really pushing it. And on one occasion, Lionel paid a surprise visit to his son, only to find the room strewn with empty liquor bottles. Now, despite his father having paid in advance for a second term, Dahmer dropped out of OSU after just 3 months. Well, in '79, at his father's urging, Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army. He underwent basic training at Fort McClellan in Anniston, Alabama, before training as a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. He was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication while stationed at Fort Sam Houston, and on one occasion, an instance of insubordination resulted in the entire platoon being punished, earning Dahmer a severe beating from his fellow recruits.
Fun.
In '79, in July, he was deployed to Baumholder, West Germany, where he served as a combat medic in the 2nd Battalion, 68th Armored Regiment, 8th Infantry. According to the published reports, Dahmer's first year of service, he was an average or slightly above average soldier. Well, owing to his alcohol abuse, his performance deteriorated, and in March of 1981, he was deemed unsuitable for military service and later discharged from the Army. He did receive an honorable discharge, and his superiors did not believe that any problems Dahmer had in the Army would be applicable to civilian life.
Of course not.
Yeah. He was sent to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, for debriefing on March 24th, provided with a plane ticket to travel anywhere in the country. Dahmer later told police he felt he could not return home to face his father, so he opted to travel to Miami Beach, Florida, both because he was tired of the cold and an attempt to live on his own means. In Florida, Dahmer would find a job at a delicatessen and rented a room in a nearby motel. He spent most of his salary on alcohol and was soon evicted from the motel for non-payment. Dahmer initially spent his evenings on the beach as he continued to work at the sandwich shop until phoning his father and asking to return to Ohio in September of the same year. Well, after his return to Ohio, Dahmer initially lived with his father and stepmother and insisted on being delegated numerous chores to occupy his time while he looked for work. He continued to drink heavily, and 2 weeks after his return, he was arrested for drunken disorderly conduct. Fined $60 and given a suspended 10-day sentence, Dahmer's father tried unsuccessfully to wean his son off the alcohol, and by December of '81, him and his second wife sent him to live with his paternal grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, in West Allis, Wisconsin. As she was the only family member to whom Dahmer displayed any positivity or affection, they hoped that her influence and change of location might persuade him to quit drinking, find a job, and live responsibly.
Nah.
No. Initially, Dahmer's living arrangements with grandmother was harmonious. He accompanied her to church, undertook chores, actively sought work, and abided by most of her home rules, although he continued to drink and smoke. In early '82, he found employment as a phlebotomist at a Milwaukee blood plasma center. He held this job for a total of 10 months before being laid off.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Dahmer would remain unemployed for over 2 years, during which he lived on whatever money his grandmother gave him. Now, shortly before losing his job, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure.
Whoops.
On August 8th, 1982, at the Wisconsin State Fair Park, he was observed exposing himself on the south side of the Coliseum, in which 25 people were present, including women and children. For this incident, he was convicted and fined $50 plus court costs. In January of 1985, Dahmer was hired as the mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he would work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 6 nights a week with Saturday evenings off. Shortly after starting this job, an incident occurred in which Dahmer was propositioned by another man while reading at the West Allis Public Library. The stranger threw Dahmer a note, offered to perform a blowjob on him. Although Dahmer did not respond to this proposition, the incident stirred the fantasies of control and dominance that had developed as a teenager, and he began to familiarize himself with the Milwaukee's gay bar scenes, bathhouses, and bookstores. He also stole a male mannequin from the store. Wouldn't that be kind of suspicious, just kind of wandering down the street with a mannequin?
I think it depends on if you're carrying it like all assembled, or if you can take it apart and put it in a box.
Yeah, kind of just a little odd. Until his, he was using it briefly for sexual stimulation until his grandmother discovered the item stowed in the closet and demanded that he discard it. Now, by 1985, he began to frequent the bathhouses, which he later described as being relaxing places, but during his sexual encounters, he became frustrated at his partners moving during the acts.
How dare they?
No kidding. Following the arrest, he stated, "I trained myself to view people as objects of pleasure instead of as people." For this reason, beginning in June of 1986, he administered sleeping pills to his partners, giving them liquor laced with sedatives. He then waited for the partners to fall asleep before performing various sexual acts. To maintain an adequate supply of medication, Dahmer would inform doctors he worked nights and required the tablets to adjust to his schedule. After approximately 12 such instances, the bathhouse administration revoked Dahmer's membership, and he began to use hotel rooms to continue this practice. Now, shortly after the bathhouse memberships were revoked, Dahmer read a report in a newspaper regarding the upcoming funeral of an 18-year-old male. He conceived the idea of stealing a freshly interred corpse and taking it home.
That's
not odd at all.
No, what are you talking about?
According to Dahmer, he attempted to dig up the coffin from the ground, but found the soil too hard and abandoned the plan. In September of 1986, Dahmer was arrested on the charge of lewd and lascivious behavior for jacking off in the presence of two 12-year-old boys as he stood close to the Kimonik River. He claimed he had been merely taking a leak, unaware that they were witnesses, but soon admitted the offense. The charges changed to disorderly conduct, and on March 10th, 1987, Dahmer was sentenced to 1 year of probation with additional instructions to undergo counseling. Now, November 20th, 1987, Dahmer, at this time still residing with grandmother. This is where the whole nightmare began for the guy, or for the people he dealt with. First, he found a 25-year-old man from Octagon, Michigan, named Stephen Toomey, at a bar and persuaded him to return to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Dahmer had rented a room for the evening. According to Dahmer, he had no intention of killing Toomey, but intended to simply drug him and lie beside him as he explored the body. That following morning, Dahmer awoke to find Toomey lying beneath him on the bed, his chest crushed in and black and blue with bruises. Blood was seeping from the corner of his mouth, and Dahmer's fists and one forearm were extensively bruised. Dahmer later said he had no memory of having killed Toomey, and that he could not believe that this had happened. Now, Dahmer purchased a large suitcase in which he transported Toomey's body to his grandmother's residence, and 1 week later cut off his head, arms, and legs, then filleted the bones from the body before cutting the flesh into pieces small enough to handle. Dahmer then placed the flesh inside plastic garbage bags. He wrapped the bones inside a sheet, pounded them into splinters with a sledgehammer. The dismembered process took Dahmer approximately 2 hours. He disposed of all of Toomey's remains, including the head, in the trash. Now, for 2 weeks following Toomey's killing, Dahmer retained Toomey's head wrapped in a blanket. After 2 weeks, Dahmer boiled the head in a mixture of Soliax, an alkalized-based industrial detergent, and bleach in an effort to retain the skull, which he used as a stimulus for jacking off. Eventually, the skull became too brittle by this bleaching process, so Dahmer pulverized and disposed of it. Now, according to Dahmer, Toomey's murder was the pivotal incident in which he did not try to control his compulsions. He began to actively seek victims, most of whom he encountered in or around the gay bars, and would typically lure them to his grandmother's home. He drugged the victims with Tazolam or temozepam shortly after engaging in sexual activity with them, and once the victim was unconscious, he would strangle them to death. The third person he wound up killing was a 14-year-old Native American prostitute, James Dux Tater, luring him to grandmother's residence with an offer for $50.
To grandmother's house we go. Sorry.
No kidding. Offer for $50 to pose for news pictures, sexual activity, drugged Doxeter, and strangled him on the floor of the cellar. Dahmer left the body in the cellar for 1 week before dismembering it, in much the same manner he did with Toomey. He placed all of Doxeter's remains, excluding the skull, in the trash. The skull was boiled and cleansed in the bleach before Dahmer found that it, too, had been rendered brittle by the process. He would pulverize the skull 2 weeks later. Next person up was Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old bisexual man outside a gay bar called the Phoenix. He lured Guerrero to his grandmother's residence. Where the heck is grandmother by this time?
Grandma's missing a lot. She's oblivious.
Yeah, she's just...
Did she die?
I have
Did we miss
idea.
the memo where she died?
Drugged Guerrero with sleeping pills, strangled him with a leather strap, performed oral sex on the corpse. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's body within 24 hours, again disposing of the remains of the trash, retaining the skull, before pulverizing it several months later. On April 23rd, Dahmer lured Richard Flowers Jr. to his house. However, after giving Flowers a jugged coffee, both he and Flowers heard Dahmer's grandmother call, "Is that
she
you,
is still
Jeff?"
alive.
Yeah.
So she is alive. She's just oblivious.
Just completely oblivious.
Got it.
Although Dahmer replied in a manner that led his grandmother to believe he was alone, she observed that he was not alone. Because of this, Dahmer was unable to kill Flowers. After Flowers became unconscious, Dahmer took him to the county general hospital. In September of '88, Dahmer's grandmother asked him to move out, largely because of his drinking, his habit of bringing home young men late at night, and the foul smells emanating from the basement and the garage.
Oh, now she notices.
Why? Oh. Dahmer found a one-bedroom apartment at 808 North 24th Street and moved into the residence on September 25th. 2 days later, he was arrested for drugging and sexually fondling a 13-year-old boy who he had lured to his home on the pretext of posing nude for photographs. Well, Dahmer's father hired attorney Gerald Boyle to defend his son. At Boyle's request, Dahmer underwent a series of psychological evaluations prior to his court hearings. The evaluations found that Dahmer harbored deep feelings of alienation. A second evaluation 2 months later revealed Dahmer to be an impulsive individual, suspicious of others, and dismayed by the lack of accomplishments in his life.
Me too.
Yeah, his probation officer later referred to a 1987 diagnosis that Dahmer suffered from schizoid personality disorder for the presentation to the court. Well, on January 30th, 1989, now figure this out. He's in court. He's already killed, 6 people. And nobody knows about all this. He pleaded guilty to charges of second-degree sexual assault and for the enticing a child for immoral purposes. Sentencing was suspended until May, and on March 20th, Dahmer commenced a 10-day Easter absence from work, during which time he moved back to grandmother's home.
Poor Grandma.
Poor Grandma. 2 months later, after his conviction, and 2 months prior to his sentencing, he murdered his 5th victim, a 24-year-old mixed-race aspiring model, Anthony Sears, who he met at a gay bar. According to Dahmer, on this particular occasion, he wasn't looking to commit a crime.
Oh.
I don't want to kill you.
So there was a point where he was looking to commit a crime.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So Sears just started talking to me. Well, Dahmer lured Sears to his grandmother's house, where the pair engaged in oral sex before Dahmer drugged and strangled him. Now, the following morning, Dahmer placed the corpse in his grandmother's bathtub,
Oh, Grandma.
where he decapitated the body before attempting to flay the corpse. He stripped the flesh from the body, pulverized the bones, disposed them in the trash, and according to Dahmer, he found Sears exceptionally attractive, and Sears was the first victim from which he permanently retained any body parts. He preserved his head and genitalia in acetone and stored them in a wooden box, which he later placed in a work locker. He then moved to his new address the following year, and he took the remains there. Now, May 23rd, 1989, remember, he was still looking at legal problems. Dahmer was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in the House of Correction with work release permitted so he could keep his job. He was required to register as a sex offender. 2 months before his scheduled release, Dahmer was paroled from this regiment. His 5 years probation imposed in 1989 began at this point. Now, Dahmer temporarily moved back to his grandmother's house.
Poor Grandma.
Poor Grandma.
She should just, forbid him to show up.
No kidding. May 14th, 1990, Dahmer moved out of grandmother's house and into 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, taking Sears' mummified head and genitals with him.
Good job.
According to the high crime area, Dahmer's new apartment was close to his workplace, was furnished, and at $300 a month, inclusive of all bills excluding electricity, was economical. And, of course, within 1 week of moving to this address, he killed a sixth victim. A 32-year-old prostitute named Raymond Smith. Dahmer lured to the apartment with the promise of $50 for sex. Inside the apartment, he gave Smith a drink laced with 7 sleeping pills, then manually strangled him.
Well then.
The following day, Dahmer purchased a Polaroid camera, which he took several pictures of the body in suggestive positions before dismembering him in the bathroom. He boiled the arms, legs, and pelvis in a steel kettle with Soilix, which he allowed him to rinse the bones in the sink. Dahmer dissolved the remainder of Smith's skeleton, including the skull, in a container filled with acid. He later spray-painted Smith's skull, which he placed alongside the skull of Sears, on a black towel inside a filing cabinet. These are my skulls. Approximately 1 week after the murder of Smith, on or about the 27th, Dahmer lured another young man to his apartment, and on this occasion, Dahmer accidentally consumed the drink laden with sedatives intended for his guest. When he awoke the following day, he discovered the man had stolen several items of clothing, $300, and a watch. Dahmer never reported this incident to police. However, on the 29th...
I find that funny.
Yes. He divulged to his probation officer that he had been robbed. Yes. Blah, blah, blah. June 1990. Dahmer lured a 27-year-old acquaintance, Edward Smith, to the apartment where he drugged and strangled him. On this occasion, rather than immediately acidifying the skeleton or repeating previous process of bleaching, he rendered the previous victim's skull brittle. Dahmer placed Smith's skeleton in the freezer for several months in the hope it would not retain moisture. Freezing the skeleton did not remove the moisture, and the skeleton of the victim was acidified several months later. Dahmer accidentally destroyed the skull when he placed it in the oven to dry, a process that caused the skull to explode. Dahmer later informed the police he had felt rotten about Smith's murder, and he had been unable to retain any of the parts for the body. Now, less than 3 months after the murder of Edward Smith, Dahmer encountered a 22-year-old Chicago native named Ernest Miller outside the bookstore on the corner of North 27th Street. Miller again agreed to accompany Dahmer to his apartment for $50, further allowed him to listen to his heart and stomach. Dahmer attempted to perform oral sex on Miller. He was informed, "That'll cost you extra," whereas Dahmer gave Miller a drink laced with 2 sleeping pills. On this occasion, Dahmer only had 2 sleeping pills to give to his victim. Therefore, he killed Miller by slashing his carotid artery with the same knife he used to dissect the victim's bodies. Miller bled to death within minutes. Dahmer then posed the nude body for various suggestive Polaroid photographs before placing it in his bathtub for dismemberment. This is my bloody bathtub.
Dahmer, you had a busy bathtub.
Yes, he did. Dahmer then posed the nude body before placing it for dismemberment, repeatedly kissed and talked to the severed head while he dismembered the remainder of the body. This dude is sick.
No, I think he's totally normal. Don't you always talk to the things that you're
killing and butchering? No.
Making art into?
Yeah. It's like that famous phrase, "Tell me, sir, yes or no, did you meet your wife?" No. So he wound up with Miller. He wrapped his heart, liver, biceps, and portions of the flesh from his legs in plastic bags and placed them in the freezer for later consumption. He boiled the remaining flesh and organs into a jelly-like substance using the Soilax, which enabled him to rinse the flesh off the skeleton, which he intended to retain. To preserve the skeleton, Dahmer placed the bones in a light bleach solution for 24 hours before allowing them to dry on the cloth for 1 week. The severed head was eventually placed in the refrigerator before being stripped of flesh, then painted and coated with enamel. 3 weeks after the murder of Miller, on the 24th of September, Dahmer encountered a 22-year-old father of two named David Thomas at the Grand Avenue Mall. He persuaded him to return to his apartment for a few drinks, additional money as an offer if he would pose for photographs, and in a statement to police after his arrest, Dahmer said that after giving Thomas a drink laden with sedatives, he did not feel attracted to him, but was afraid to allow him to waken, fearing he would be angry over having been drugged. Therefore, he strangled him and dismembered the body.
Because I don't want you to be angry at me, I'm going to kill you.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, intentionally retaining no body parts whatsoever. He photographed the dismemberment process and retained these photographs. The guy's got one heck of a photo album.
Right?
Which he later aided in Thomas's identification. Now, following Thomas's death, Dahmer did not kill anyone for almost 5 months.
Wow, good for him!
Yeah. Although, on a minimum of 5 occasions, he unsuccessfully attempted to lure men to his apartment. He regularly complained of his feelings of both anxiety and depression to his probation officer through 1990, with frequent references to his sexuality, his solitary lifestyle, financial difficulties, and shortly before Thanksgiving, his apprehension regarding meeting and facing his father and younger brother. On several occasions, Dahmer also referenced to harboring suicidal thoughts. Well, in February of 1991, Dahmer observed a 17-year-old named Curtis Straughter standing at a bus stop near Marquette University. According to Dahmer, he lured Straughter to his apartment with an offer of money for nude photos and added the incentive of sexual intercourse. Dahmer drugged Straughter, cuffed his hands behind his back, and strangled him to death with a leather strap.
Woo!
He then dismembered Straughter, retaining the skull, hands, genitals, and photographing each stage of the dismemberment process.
Well then.
2 months later, Dahmer encountered a 19-year-old named Errol Lindsay walking to get a key cut. Dahmer lured Lindsay to the apartment, which he drugged him, drilled a hole into his skull, and injected hydrochloric acid with a baster.
Well then.
According to Dahmer, Lindsay awoke after this experiment, which Dahmer had conceived in the hope of inducing a permanent, unresistant, submissive state, saying, "I have a headache. What time is it?" In response to this, Dahmer again drugged Lindsay and strangled him. He decapitated Lindsay and retained the skull. He then inflated Lindsay's body, placing the skin in a solution of cold water and salt for several weeks in the hope of permanently retaining it. Reluctantly, he disposed of Lindsay's skin when he noticed it had become too frayed and brittle. Now, in 1991, fellow residents of the Oxford Apartments had repeatedly complained to the building's manager, Sopa Princewell, of the foul smells emanating from apartment 213. I wonder why.
Maybe he just needs to clean up. Maybe he's like one of those hoarder people.
Maybe. In addition to the sounds of falling objects and occasional sound of a chainsaw.
Oh, well, that's totally normal, right?
Totally normal on the second floor, yeah.
We change till every Tuesday, right?
Yeah, you know. Principal contacted Dahmer in response to these complaints on several occasions, although he initially excused the odor emanating from the apartment as being caused by the freezer breaking, causing the contents to become spoiled. On later occasions, he informed Principal that the reason for the resurgence of the odor was that several of his tropical fish had recently died, and that he would take care of the matter. May 24th, 1991, Dahmer encountered a 31-year-old aspiring model, Tony Hughes, at a nightclub. He was lured to Dahmer's apartment with the offer of money to pose for photographs. Hughes had drugged him into unconsciousness before Dahmer injected hydrochloric acid into his skull in an effort to disable his will and render him submissive, although on this occasion the drilling and injection proved fatal. Now, in the afternoon of May 26, 1991, Dahmer encountered a 14-year-old Laotian teenager, Konarak Sinosmathophone, on Wisconsin Avenue. Yeah, it's like 14 letters. Unknown to Dahmer, he was the youngest brother of a boy he had molested in 1988. Dahmer offered Sylvester full money to accompany him to the apartment to pose for Polaroid pictures. According to Dahmer, he was initially reluctant to the proposal before changing his mind and accompanying him to the apartment, where he posed for 2 pictures before Dahmer drugged him into unconsciousness and performed oral sex on him. Well, before the fellow fell unconscious, Dahmer led the boy to his bedroom, where the body of Tony Hughes, who Dahmer had killed 3 days earlier, laid naked on the floor.
Well, that's totally normal, right?
Exactly. According to Dahmer, he believed that he saw the body, yet did not react to seeing the bloated corpse, likely because of the effects of the sleeping pills he ingested. On this occasion,
makes sense.
Yeah. On this occasion, Dahmer drilled a single narrow hole in the crown of Cynthia's skull, through which he injected the hydrochloric acid into the frontal lobe. Dahmer then drank several beers while lying alongside Smitherphone before briefly falling asleep and then leaving the apartment to drink at a bar and purchase more alcohol.
Because, we definitely need more alcohol.
Yeah. He returned at the early morning hours of May 27th. Dahmer returned home to discover the guy sitting naked on the corner of 25th and State talking to Lau with 3 distressed young women standing near him. Dahmer approached the women and told them that this fellow, who is referring to the alias John Humong, was his friend and attempted to lead him to his apartment by the arm. The 3 women dissuaded Dahmer, explaining they had phoned 911. Well, here's where it starts getting kind of crazy. Upon the arrival of 2 Milwaukee police officers, now they've got a guy who is almost dead, 3 witnesses. Dahmer, appeared relaxed. He told the officers that Smothman was his 19-year-old boyfriend. And he drank too much during a quarrel, and he frequently behaved in this manner when intoxicated. Dahmer added his lover had consumed Jack Daniels whiskey that evening. The 3 women were exasperated, and when one of the trio attempted to indicate to one of the officers, both who had observed no injuries beyond the scrape to his knee and believed to be intoxicated, he had blood on his testicles, was bleeding from his rectum, and had seemingly struggled against Dahmer's attempt to walk him to the apartment. The officers harshly informed her to butt out, shut the hell up, and not to interfere. Good job, police officers.
The age where women know nothing.
Yeah. Shortly after the arrival of the Milwaukee police, 3 members of the Milwaukee Fire Department also arrived, and these individuals also examined him to find injuries and provided a yellow blanket for the police officers to cover Smothfoot with. One of the 3 believed that he needed treatment, but the police officers directed the fire department to leave. Shortly thereafter, Officer Richard Poralcan arrived on the scene. Him and Gabberish, followed by Belzerac, escorted Dahmer and his friend to Dahmer's apartment, as Dahmer repeatedly commented on the general crime in the neighborhood as appreciation of the police.
I appreciate your services. Thank you for helping me.
Inside the apartment, in an effort to verify the claim that him and his friend were lovers, Dahmer showed the officials the 2 semi-nude Polaroid pictures he had taken the previous evening. Although Boswell said he smelled nothing unusual, Gabberish later stated he noticed a strange scent reminiscent of excrement inside the apartment. The odor emanated from the decomposing body of Hughes. Dahmer stated to investigate the odor, one officer simply peeked his head around the bedroom, but really didn't take a good look. The officers then left with the departing remark that Dahmer take good care of his friend. The incident was listed by the officers as a domestic dispute. I hope those 3 guys got fired, to be honest with you, because they blew it big time. Now, upon the departure of the 3 officers, Dahmer again injected hydrochloric acid into the guy's brain. The second injection proved fatal, and on the following day, Dahmer took a day's leave from work to devote himself to the dismemberment of the bodies of his friend and Hughes. He retained both victims' skulls. Now, June 30th, Dahmer traveled to Chicago, where he encountered a 20-year-old named Matt Turner in a bus station. Turner accepted Dahmer's offer to travel to Milwaukee for a professional photo shoot. At the apartment, Dahmer drugged, strangled, and dismembered Turner and placed his head and internal organs in separate plastic bags in the freezer. Turner was not reported missing. 5 days later, on June 5th, Dahmer lured a 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger from Chicago bar to his apartment with the promise of spending the weekend with him. He again drugged Weinberger and twice injected boiling water into his skull, sending him into a coma, which he died 2 days later. Dahmer would also encounter a 24-year-old Oliver Lacey at the corner of 27th and Kilbourne. Lacey agreed to Dahmer's ruse of posing nude for photographs and accompanied him to his apartment, where the pair engaged in a tentative sexual activity before Dahmer drugged Lacey. On this occasion, Dahmer intended to prolong his time he spent with Lacey while alive. After unsuccessfully attempting to render Lacey unconscious with chloroform, he phoned his workplace to request a day's absence, which was granted, although the next day he was suspended. After strangling Lacey, Dahmer had sex with the corpse before dismembering him. He placed Lacey's head and heart in the refrigerator and skeleton in the freezer. 4 days later, Dahmer received word that he was dismissed. Upon receiving the news, Dahmer lured a 25-year-old Joseph Baderhorf to his apartment. Baderhorf was strangled and left lying on Dahmer's bed, covered with a sheet for 2 days. On July 21st, Dahmer removed the sheet to find the head covered in maggots.
Oh, man.
He decapitated the body, cleaned the head, placed it in the refrigerator. He later acidified Baderhorf's torso, along with the 2 other victims he'd killed with the previous month. Now, finally getting to the good stuff.
That wasn't the good stuff?
No.
Correct.
The law finally catches up to him.
They found a clue?
Well, a few clues, apparently. July 22nd, Dahmer approached 3 men with an offer of $100 to accompany him to the apartment to pose for photographs, drink beer, and simply keep him company. Of the trio, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards agreed to accompany him to his apartment. Upon entering the apartment, Edwards noticed a foul odor and several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor, which Dahmer claimed to be using for cleaning bricks. After some minor conversation, Edwards responded to Dahmer's request to turn his head and view the tropical fish, whereas thereupon placed a handcuff on his wrist. When Edwards asked what's going on, Dahmer unsuccessfully attempted to cuff his wrists together, then told Edwards to accompany him to the bedroom, where they'll pose for pictures. While inside the bedroom, Edwards noted the male posters on the wall, and the videotape of The Exorcist 3 was playing. He noted a 52-gallon drum in his corner, from which a strong odor emanated. Dahmer then brandished a knife and informed Edwards he intended to take pictures of him. In an attempt to appease Dahmer, Edwards unbuttoned his shirt, saying he would allow him to do so if he would remove the handcuffs and put the knife away. In response to his promise, Dahmer simply turned his attention back towards the TV. Edwards observed Dahmer rocking back and forth and chanting before turning his attention back to him.
Well then.
He placed his head on Edwards' chest, listened to his heartbeat, and the knife pressed against his intended victim. Edwards informed Edwards he wanted to eat his heart.
Yum.
In a conscientious attempt to prevent Dahmer from attacking him, Edwards repeated he was Dahmer's friend and he was not going to run away. Edwards had decided that he was either going to jump from the window or run through the unlocked front door on his next available opportunity. When Edwards stated he used to use the bathroom, he asked if they could sit with a beer in the living room where there was air conditioning. Dahmer consented, and the pair walked to the living room, where Edwards exited the bathroom. Living inside the living room, Edwards waited until he observed Dahmer have a momentary lapse of concentration before requesting to use the bathroom again. When Edwards rose from the couch, he noted Dahmer was not holding the handcuffs, whereupon Edwards punched him in the face, knocking Dahmer off balance, and ran out the front door. Now, at 11:30 p.m. that night, Edwards flagged down 2 officers of the Milwaukee Police Department, Robert Ralph and Rolf Moeller, at the corners of North 25th Street. The officers noted Edwards had a handcuff attached to his wrist, whereupon he explained to the officers that a freak had placed handcuffs on him and asked the police if they could remove them. When the officers' handcuffs failed to fit the branded handcuffs, Edwards agreed to accompany the officers to the apartment, where Edwards stated he had spent 5 hours prior to escaping. Now, when the officers arrived at apartment 213, Dahmer invited the trio inside and acknowledged he'd placed the handcuffs on Edwards, although he offered no explanation to why he'd done so. At this point, Edwards divulged to the officers that Dahmer had also brandished a large knife upon him and that this had happened in the bedroom. Dahmer made no comment to this revelation, indicating that one of the officers, Mueller, that the key to the handcuffs was in the bedside dresser. As Mueller entered the bedroom, Dahmer attempted to pass Mueller to retrieve the key himself, whereupon the second officer present, Ralph, informed him to back off. In the bedroom, Mueller noted that there was a large knife beneath the bed. He saw an open drawer that, upon closer inspection, contained scores of Polaroid pictures. Many of them were human bodies in various stages of dismemberment. Mueller noted the decor indicated they'd been taken to the same apartment where they were standing. Mueller walked to the living room to show them to his partner, uttering the words, "These are for real." Now, Dahmer saw that Mueller was holding several of the Polaroids. He fought with the officers in an effort to resist arrest. The officers quickly overpowered him, cuffed his hands behind his back, and called a second squad car for backup. At this point, Mueller opened the refrigerator to reveal several freshly severed heads of a black male at the bottom shelf. As Dahmer lay pinned to the floor beneath Ralph, he turned his head towards the officers and muttered the words, "For what I did, I should be dead."
I mean...
Now, for those of you who are kind of curious, this starts to play into what we talked about last week with CSI. Okay, a more detailed search of the apartment conducted by the Milwaukee Police Criminal Investigation Bureau
Yay, CSI!
revealed a series of 4 severed heads in Dahmer's kitchen. A total of 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, were found in Dahmer's bedroom and inside a closet. Investigators discovered collected blood drippings upon a tray at the bottom of Dahmer's refrigerator.
Well, that's wonderful.
Plus 2 human hearts, a portion of arm muscle, each wrapped inside plastic bags on the shelves. In Dahmer's freezer, investigators discovered an entire torso, plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom. Elsewhere in apartment 213, investigators discovered 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed or preserved penises, a mummified scalp, and in the 57-gallon drum, 3 further dismembered torsos dissolving in the acid solution. A total of 74 Polaroid pictures detailing dismemberment of Dahmer's victims were found. In reference to the discovery of the body parts and artifacts at 924 North 25th Street, the chief medical examiner, Emmy, later stated it was more like the dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene.
I mean, not wrong.
Not wrong. Well, beginning in the early hours, Dahmer was questioned by Detective Patrick Kennedy as to the murders he committed and the evidence found in his apartment. Over the following 2 weeks, Kennedy and later Detective Dennis Murphy, who conducted numerous interviews with Dahmer, when combined, totaled over 60 hours.
Wow.
Dahmer waived his right to have a lawyer present throughout the interrogations, adding he wished to confess all he had created this horror, and it only makes sense. I do it to put an end to it. He readily admitted to having murdered 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987, with 1 further victim, Stephen Hicks, killed in Ohio in 1978. Most of the victims had been rendered unconscious prior to the murder, although some had died as a result of having acid or boiling water injected into their brain. As he had no memory of the killing of the second victim, Stephen Tomey, he was unsure whether he was unconscious when beaten to death, although he did concede it was possible. His viewing of the exposed chest of Tomey while in a drunken stupor may have led him to unsuccessfully attempt to tear Tomey's heart from his chest. Almost all of the murders of Dahmer committed after moving to the Oxford apartments had involved a ritual of posing the victims' bodies in suggestive positions, typically with the chest thrust outward prior to dismemberment. Dahmer readily admitted to engaging in necrophilia with several of the victims' bodies, including sexual acts with the viscera, as well as dismembering the bodies in the bathtub. Having noted that much of the blood pooled inside the victim's chest after the death, Dahmer first removed their internal organs, then suspended the torso so the blood drained into his bathtub before dicing any organs he did not wish to retain and paring the flesh from the body. The bones he wished to dispose of were pulverized or acidified with Soilax and bleach. Solutions were used to aid the preservation of the skeletons and skulls he wished to keep. Dahmer confessed to having consumed the hearts, liver, biceps, and portions of thigh of 3 victims he had killed at the Oxford apartments. and having retained the flesh and organs of other victims for intended consumption. Dahmer would tenderize the body parts he intended to consume prior to preparing meals, flavored with various condiments.
Well then.
Charming dude.
Yum.
Referencing reasons for the consuming of the victims, Dahmer stated he had initially consumed portions of the victims due to curiosity before adding, I suppose in an odd way, it made me feel they were even a more permanent part of me.
I mean, he's kind of not wrong.
Yeah. Describing the increase in his rate of killing in the 2 months prior to the arrest, Dahmer stated he had been completely swept along with his compulsion to kill, adding, it was an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost. Somewhat good-looking, really nice-looking, it just filled my thoughts all day long. When asked to why he preserved a total of 7 skulls, and as to the entire skeletons of 2 victims, Dahmer stated he had been in the process of constructing a private altar of victim skulls, which he intended to display on the black table located in his living room, and upon which he had photographed the bodies of many of his victims. This display of skulls would be adorned with each side with the complete skeletons of Miller, and Lacey. The 4 severed heads found in the kitchen were to have all flesh removed and used in an altar, as were the skull of at least 1 future victim. Incense sticks were to be placed at each end of the black table, with Dahmer intended to place a large blue lamp of extending blue globe lights.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah, the construction was to be placed before a window covered with black opaque shower curtain, in front of which Dahmer had intended to sit in a black leather chair. When asked on November 18, 1991 interview whom the altar was dedicated, Dahmer replied, myself. It was a place where I could feel at home. He later described the intended altar as a place for meditation, from which he believed he could draw a sense of power, adding, if this, his arrest, had happened 6 months later, this is what they would have found. Well, July 25th, 1991, Dahmer was charged with 4 counts first-degree murder. By August 22nd, he'd been charged with a further 11 murders committed in Wisconsin, and on September the 14th, investigators in Ohio, having uncovered the hundreds of bone fragments in the woodland behind the address with which Dahmer had convinced of killing his first victim, formally identified, CSI, 2 molars and a vertebra with X-ray records for Hicks. 3 days later, Dahmer was charged by authorities in Ohio with Hicks's murder. Now, Dahmer was not charged with the attempted murder of Edwards, nor with the murder of Toomey. He was not charged with Toomey's murder because the district attorney could only brought charges where murder could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and Dahmer had no memory of physically committing the particular crime. At a scheduled preliminary hearing on January 13th, 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to all 15 counts of murder.
Me too.
Now, the trial would begin 1992 in January. He was tried in Milwaukee for the 15 counts before Judge Lawrence Graham. By pleading guilty on January 13th to the charges brought against him, Dahmer had waived the rights to a trial to establish guilt, as defined by Wisconsin law. Attorneys at Dahmer's trial debated whether he suffered from either a mental or personality disorder. The prosecution claimed that any disorders did not deprive Dahmer of the ability to appreciate the criminality of his conduct, or to deprive him of the ability to resist his impulses. The defense argued Dahmer suffered from a mental disease and was driven by his obsessions and impulses, but was unable to control them. Now, defense's experts argued that Dahmer was insane due to his necrophiliac drive, his compulsion to have sexual encounters with corpses. Defense expert Fred Berlin testified that Dahmer was unable to conform to his conduct at the time, and that he committed his crimes due to the paraphilia, or more specifically necrophilia. Judith Becker, a professor of psychiatry and psychology, was the second expert witness for the defense. Becker diagnosed Dahmer as a necrophiliac, although she added Dahmer had informed her he preferred comatose sexual partners to deceased ones 75% of the time. The final defense expert to testify, forensic psychiatrist Carl Wallstrom, diagnosed Dahmer with necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, alcohol dependence, and psychotic disorder.
I agree.
And if any of you are playing Scrabble, on February 8th, Fred Forstall testified on behalf of the prosecution. Forstall testified to his belief that Dahmer was without mental disease or defect at the time he committed the murders. He described Dahmer as a calculating and cunning individual, able to differentiate between right and wrong, and his ability to control his actions, whose lust overpowered his morals. Although Fostel did state that he believed Dahmer was not paralytic, he had conclusion that Dahmer was not a sadist. The second and final witness to appear for the prosecution, forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz, began his testimony on February the 12th. Dietz testified he did not believe Dahmer had any form of mental disease or defect at the time he committed the crime, stating, Dahmer went to great lengths to be alone with his victim and had no witnesses. He explained that there were ample evidence that Dahmer prepared in advance for each murder, therefore his crimes were not impulsive. Although Dietz did conclude any acquisition of paraphilia was not a matter of personal choice, he stated his belief that Dahmer's habit of becoming intoxicated prior to committing each of the murders was significant. If he had the impulse to kill or compulsion to kill, he wouldn't have a drink to overcome it. He only had to drink alcohol to overcome it because he is inhibited against killing. Dietz noted that Dahmer strongly identified with the villains of The Exorcist III and Return of the Jedi, particularly the level of power held by the characters. Expounding on the significance of these movies on Dahmer's psyche and many of the murders committed at the Oxford apartments, Dietz explained that Dahmer occasionally viewed scenes from the film before searching for a victim. Dietz diagnosed Dahmer with substance abuse disorder, paraphilia, and schizotype personality disorder. The former psychiatrist George Palermo and clinical psychologist Samuel Friedman testified about the prosecution or defense and Dahmer's pathology independently. Palermo stated that Dahmer was motivated to commit murder by a pent-up aggression within himself. He killed those men because he wanted to kill the source of his homosexual attraction to them. In killing them, he killed what he hated in himself. Palermo concluded that Dahmer had severe mixed personality disorder with antisocial, obsessive-compulsive, sadistic, fetishistic, borderline, and necrophilic features, but otherwise legally sane.
Totally sane.
Yeah. But the closing arguments trial lasted 2 weeks. On February 14th, both attorneys delivered closing arguments to the jury. Each attorney was allowed to speak for 2 hours. Defense attorney Gerald Boyle argued first, repeatedly referring to the testimony of the mental health professionals, almost all of them who agreed Dahmer was afflicted with mental disease. Boyle argued that Dahmer's compulsive killings had been a result of a sickness he had discovered, not chose. Boyle portrayed Dahmer as a desperately lonely and profoundly sick individual, so out of control he could not conform to his conduct anymore. Following the defense counsel's 75-minute closing argument, Michael McCann delivered his closing statements for the prosecution, describing Dahmer as a sane man in full control of his actions who simply strove to avoid detection. McCann described Dahmer as a calculating individual who killed to control his victims and retained the bodies merely to afford himself a prolonged period of sexual pleasure. McCann argued that the pleading guilty but insane to the charges, Dahmer was seeking to escape responsibility for his crimes. Well, the day later, the court reconvened to hear the verdict. Dahmer was ruled to be sane and not suffered from mental disorder for the 15 murders which he was tried, although in each count, 2 of the 12 jurors signified their dissent. Formal sentencing was postponed until February 17th. And then on that date, Dahmer's attorney announced the client wished to address the court. Dahmer then approached the lectern and read from a statement prepared by himself and his defense as he faced the judge. In his statement, Dahmer emphasized that he had never desired freedom following his arrest, and he frankly wished for his own death. He further stressed that none of the murders had been motivated by hatred, that he understood that nothing had said or did could undo the terrible harm he had caused to the families of the victims and the city of Milwaukee, that his doctors believed his criminal behavior had been motivated by mental disorders. Dahmer added that his medical knowledge had given him some peace, and that although he understood that society would never forgive him, he hoped God would. Dahmer closed his statement with, "I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. Thank you, Your Honor. I am prepared for your sentence, which I know will be the maximum. Ask for no consideration." He then returned to his seat to await formal sentencing. Well, as we mentioned, Dahmer was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years for the first 2 counts. The remaining 13 counts carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment plus 70 years. The death penalty was not an option for Judge Graham to consider at that time because Wisconsin had abolished capital punishment in 1853. Now, upon hearing of Dahmer's sentencing, his father, Lionel, and stepmother, Sherry, requested to be allowed a 10-minute private meeting with their son before he is transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage to begin a sentence. This request was granted, and the trio exchanged hugs and well wishes before Dahmer would be escorted away. Now, 3 months after his conviction in Milwaukee, Dahmer was extradited to Ohio to be tried for the murder of his first victim. In a court hearing lasted only 45 minutes, Dahmer again pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to the 16th term on May 1st, 1992. Now, as I mentioned, upon sentencing, Dahmer was transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution. For the first year of his incarceration, he was placed in solitary confinement due to the concerns for his physical safety should he come into contact with fellow inmates.
I mean, no.
Yeah. He received ample correspondence from individuals around the world, with several individuals donating money, which he spent on items like cassette recordings, stationery, cigarettes, and magazines. Upon Dahmer's request, after 1 year of solitary confinement, he was transferred to a less secure unit. Just absolute craziness. Shortly after completing the lengthy confessions in 1991, Dahmer had requested Detective Murphy that he be granted a copy of the Bible. The request was granted. Dahmer gradually devoted himself to Christianity and became a born-again Christian. At his father's urgings, he began to read creationist books from the Institute of Creation Research. In 1984, Dahmer was baptized by Roy Ratcliffe, minister of the Church of Christ and a graduate of the Oklahoma Christian University, whom he had met on April 20th. The service was conducted in the prison whirlpool. Following his baptism, Ratcliffe visited him every week. The two regularly discussed the prospect of death. Ratcliffe divulged that in the months prior to his murder, Dahmer had questioned whether he was sinning against God by continuing to live. Referring to his crimes in a 1994 interview with Stone Phillips on Dateline NBC, Dahmer had stated, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway.
Not wrong.
Yeah. On July 3rd, 1994, a fellow inmate, Osvaldo Duthuri, attempted to slash Dahmer's throat with a razor embedded in a toothbrush as Dahmer sat in a prison chapel after the weekly church service was concluded. Dahmer received superficial wounds, but not seriously hurt in the incident. According to Dahmer's family, he had been long ready to die and accepted any punishment which might he endure in prison. In addition to his father and stepmother maintaining regular contact, Dahmer's mother, Joyce, had maintained regular contact with her son. Now, on the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer left his cell to conduct his assigned work detail. Accompanying him were two fellow inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The crew were left unsupervised in the shower of the prison gym for approximately 20 minutes.
Nothing.
Approximately at 8:10, Dahmer was discovered on the floor of the bathroom, suffered from extreme head wounds, and he had been severely bludgeoned in the head and face with a 20-inch metal bar. His head had also been repeatedly struck against the wall in the assault. Although Dahmer was still alive and rushed to the nearby hospital, he was pronounced dead 1 hour later. Anderson had beat him with the same instrument. He had died from his wounds 2 days later. Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for the murder committed in 1990, informed authorities he had first attacked Dahmer with a metal bar as Dahmer was cleaning a staff locker room before attacking Anderson as Anderson cleaned an inmate locker room. According to Scarver, Dahmer did not yell or make any noise as he was attacked. Immediately after attacking both men, Scarver, who was thought to be schizophrenic, returned to his cell and informed the prison guard, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead." Scarver was adamant he did not plan the attacks in advance, although he later did divulge to investigators he concealed the 20-inch iron bar used to kill both men in his clothing shortly before the killings. But that is the date in history, the 28th of November. that a serial killer left our planet, and it's kind of a rough way to say it. The world's a safer place for this guy leaving us, and CSI was able to bring him to justice for all the crimes that he did. But folks, have a good one. We'll see you after Thanksgiving. This is the Bearded Historian saying bye-bye.
Goodbye.